When people think of the Lockheed P-38 Lightning in the Pacific War, one aircraft almost always comes to mind, a silver fighter marked with red accent bearing the name Marge on its nose. Forever linked to America's highest scoring fighter ace, Major Richard Bong. For decades, this aircraft has been remembered as the machine that carried Bong through his legendary rise. But history, as it often does, tell a more complicated story. Because the truth is this: for much of Richard Bong's combat career, Marge did not exist at all. And when she family did, her operational life was far more tragic than most people realize. So how did this single P-38 become so famous? Why did it barely see combat, and what really happened to deep in the jungle of the Pacific? In February of 1944, Richard Bong returned to the flooded Pacific after completing a highly publicized Bond tour in the United States. By that point, he was already a national hero with 21 confirmed aerial kills. Bong had become one of the most laser fighter pilots the war had produced. Newspapers followed his every move, and his name was spoken alongside legends of earlier conflict. He rejoined the 49 fighter group in New Guinea, preparing for what would be his second combat tour. Up to this point, Bong had never been attached to a single aircraft. His earlier Lightning were plain, utilitarian machine, olive drab, scared by flak and bullets, and quickly replaced when damaged. In one letter home, he wrote that decorating a plane felt pointless. He simply didn't keep them long enough. That mindset, however, was about to change. Upon returning to the Pacific, Bong was issued a new P-38 Lightning, now finished in the standard bare metal aluminum scheme. But despite his growing fame, Bong resisted flashy personalization. Instead, he chose something subtle but unmistakable. He requested that the propeller spinner nose cones, wing tips, and rudder tips be painted a vivid red. The result was striking without being theatrical. The aircraft stood out instantly in the air, making Bong easy to identify for friendly pilots and impossible to miss for everyone else. It wasn't the bold spectacle of First World War paint scheme, but it was enough to establish a visual identity. The foundation of a legend had been laid. Bong's return to combat was immediate and decisive. On February 15, 1944, he took off alongside his close friend and wingman Lieutenant Colonel Thomas J. Lynch. The two pilots frequently flew pair patrols, and together they formed one of the most effective hunter-killers team in the Pacific. At the time, Bong had 21 kills. Lynch followed closely behind with 17. Few enemy pilots survived encounters with the fare. That day, Bong destroyed a Ki-61 Tony fighters, marking his 22nd confirmed kills and the first victory scored while flying his newly modified Lightning. Over the next several weeks, Bong repeated combat missions, often with Lynch at his side. Kills were rare, but opportunities were increasing. Then came March 3rd. On a fighter sweep over New Guinea, Bong encountered enemy bombers. In a short but intense engagement, he shot down two twin-engine aircraft, bringing his total 24 victories. Lynch matched him blow for blow, downing two fighters of his own. For a brief moment, everything seemed perfectly aligned. Two allied pilots, two proven aircraft, total air superiority. But war has a way of shattering momentum without warning. 5 days later, Bong and Lynch launched on another routine to ship patrol. This time, the skies were empty, with no enemy aircraft in sight. They redirected their attention to a small vessel spotted below and began a low-level strafing run. That decision proved fatal. Japanese ground forces opened fire with machine gun and light anti-aircraft weapon. One round struck Lynch P-38. The aircraft ignited instantly. Lynch attempted to escape, but the altitude was too low. His parachute never had a chance to deploy. He was killed on impact. Bong watched helplessly. His own aircraft was badly damaged in the same engagement. One engine was crippled, forcing him to limp back to base alone. After landing, ground crews counted 87 bullet holes in his Lightning. The loss of Lynch devastated Bong. From that point forward, those who knew him noticed a change. The edge remained, but the crafty confidence was gone. While Bong damaged P-38 underwent extensive repairs, he made a request he had never made before. He asked for no Nozard. The image would not be a pin-up or a cartoon character. Instead, he wanted something deeply personal. The aircraft would carry the name and photograph of Marjorie Marge, a young woman he had met during his time in the United States. His crew chief enlarged a wallet-sized photo of Marge, carefully attaching it to the left side of the aircraft nose and sealing it in place. Her name was painted nearby following a red script. Alongside it, Bong 24 victory marking were added for the first time. The transformation was dramatic. This was no longer just a fighter, it was a story, one that symbolized home, sacrifice, and success. Within days, war correspondent arrived. Photographs of Richard Bong standing beside his newly named Lightning were taken and quickly circulated back in the United States. For the American public, the image was perfect, the nation's leading ace. His victory proudly displayed, and the face of the woman he was fighting for painted on his aircraft. Marge became inseparable from Bong legend almost overnight, but the reality behind the photographs told a very different story. Despite her fame, Marge saw almost no combat success. Bong flew only a handful of missions in the aircraft after it was painted, and never scored a single victory while flying it. Then on March 24, 1944, disaster struck again. The P-38 was loaned to Lieutenant Thomas Milone for a routine weather reconnaissance flight, a common practice in the unit. Midway through the mission, severe weather closed in. At the same time, engine trouble developed. Likely lingering damage from early combat, Milone lost radio contact. With control slipping away, he made the only decision left to him. He bailed out. The aircraft, already legendary, vanished into the jungle below. Milone survived and was recovered days later. Marge did not. Just a week after becoming a national symbol, the most famous P-38 in the Pacific was gone. Bong continued flying and continued scoring victories, but never again in that aircraft. Future Lightning carried only the familiar red marking. Attempt to reapply Marge photograph proved impractical, as airflow rapidly tore its loose for publicity purposes. Later aircraft were temporarily painted to resemble the original, but none were truly hurt. For nearly 80 years, Marge remained lost, swallowed by some of the hardest terrain on Earth. In 2024, that mystery finally came to an end. After a year of research and fieldwork, Pacific Rock researcher Justin Taylor and his team located the remains of a P-38 deep in the jungle of the New Guinea. Among the wreckage was a defining clue, a red painted wingtip. Serial number confirmation removed all doubt. The aircraft was Richard Bong's original Marge. At last, her story could be completed. Marge was never Bong's most successful fighter. She did not carry him to his highest victory total. She was not present for the climatic moment of his career. Instead, her importance lies elsewhere. She represents a moment, a turning point in the life of America's greatest ace, the cost of war, and the power of image in shaping history. More than 8 decades later, her discovery remained us that legends are often built not long service but on timing, symbolism, and memory. And sometimes the most famous aircraft in history flew for only a brief moment before disappearing forever.